US President Donald Trump is warning all hell will rain down on Iran if it doesn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz within the next 2 days. He issued the threat on social media, writing, "Remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait? Time is running out."
Well, everybody, this is Alex with Reporterfy Media, and I'm here with Larry C. Johnson. Larry, it's great to have you back on the program today. How are you doing, sir?
Well, I appreciate the invite, Alex, and big fan of yours as well. Watched you on the Duran.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, Larry, what would be the best title that we could give for you? Because you're an expert in just about everything.
Yeah, a mile wide and inch deep. I've been looking back. I was fortunate in my life experience that I didn't get pigeonholed. A lot of times, particularly when you work for the federal government, you can go in and get stovepiped. You're an FBI agent, and you spend your entire career as an FBI agent, and so you see the world through FBI lenses. I started off working on both sides of the CIA, both the operations side and then the analytical side. That's where I was my final job when I left. Then I wound up in a policy-making role at State Department in counterterrorism, dealing with transportation security and anti-terrorism assistance training. And then, 4 years doing that, and then I was hired there as a contract employee. Contract went away, and so I started consulting. And I was one of the things I was asked to do was to start scripting counterterrorism exercises for U.S. military special operations forces, which sounds incredibly sexy. Except my job, I call myself the token homosexual, because my job was to write State Department messages. And to replicate what the Secretary of State would send out in a crisis and what the embassies would send out. But I worked with some incredible group of people. Some of the guys the initial guys I worked with had been on the Son Tay raid in Vietnam, which was an attempt to rescue American hostages, going back more than 50 years. And then got another part of my consulting business was doing money laundering investigations. So it was, I had sort of the full panoply. I wasn't looking through just one lens. I could see multiple lenses. So it's like, looking at this rescue of the downed crewman from that F-15 the other day. There are things I see looking at that the average person doesn't, simply because I know how the system works. And like, for example, when they said, they had hundreds on the ground, but you only had evidence of 2 C-130s, and you had 4 little birds. Well, right off the bat, I know each C-130 can carry 2 little birds. And then in addition to that, it can carry up to 15 combat-loaded soldiers. So, I'm not great at math, but I can say, okay, 15 times 2, that's 30. That's not 100. That's 30. Okay, so right away we knew we were being gaslit by the Trump administration. They were lying. But I've seen over the course of my time, I worked 23 years scripting those exercises with JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, and that meant I worked with Delta Force, with SEAL Team 6. So I was on the inside seeing the actual message traffic when Pat Tillman was killed in a friendly fire incident in Afghanistan back in, this was at 2003, 2004. I was on the inside when the whole lone survivor thing went down. Marcus Luttrell, the one SEAL that escaped, and the other 3 got killed, and then a rescue chopper went out and they got killed. And then the whole bin Laden raid. And in every single case, the U.S. government was lying its ass off about what had actually happened. And, spin. And we're seeing that again today with respect to what's going on with Iran.
I identify a lot of these things in the financial market. Being a derivatives trader for over 22 years, I start to identify peculiar things that are going on in the markets. And we usually see them when most eyes are off the market. For instance, the regulators. The regulators are 9 to 5 guys. They are civil regulators, most of them, especially when it comes to the financial markets. It's usually the Security and Exchange Commission or local regulatory bodies that have only civil powers. When we get into the Department of Justice, unless it's a big cash or a big catch, as they said, with a lot of money, we tend to pretty much divert these away. These financial crimes are never actually accounted for. And it's like, murders, 1 in 20 murders are solved, or maybe 1 in 100 murders are solved. Well, financial crimes, it might be 1 in 1,000. So if we have a mixture here of a lot of money at play, and we're talking the fiscal financial markets when it comes to oil, we have a lot of cheerleading by the administration, a lot of market manipulation by the administration going on here. It wouldn't surprise me if now we have it playing out on the actual battlefield. And you were one of the first guys to actually, let's say, divulge this information and make a pretty good judgment here. At first, I heard from a good friend of mine, Cyrus Jansen. He's saying, Alex, this doesn't make any sense. And at first, I kind of said, Cyrus, maybe the guy's injured. Maybe they just wanted to get him away. And, Cyrus is a pretty bright guy. And he's saying, no, Alex, this is not making any sense. I paused and I said, wait a minute. This is not making any sense.
Yeah.
And I immediately got on my email. I said, I got to get Larry on here to explain this, because what is going on here? Tell us, Larry, what's going on?
with the specific rescue incident, or the overall where we are with this so-called ceasefire?
Well, let's talk about the rescue. Was it a rescue, or was it a cover-up for something else?
No, well, the JSOC, the Tier 1 element, I think it was the SEALs. So I don't know specifically, but they had been teed up to be prepared to launch an operation. And I think the operation was going to be up against Natanz, which is just north of Isfahan, or Isfahan itself. They're nuclear sites at both. The goal was probably not so much to take control of uranium, but to go in and sabotage the facility, because to try to collect radioactive material or enriched uranium it was just too heavy a logistics effort. And how do I know that? Because I was involved with scripting an exercise using that scenario 20 years ago. So, and the lesson we learned out of that was, don't do it. It's too hard, too costly. So that happened. Meanwhile, this F-15 Eagle takes off, and sitting in the back seat is the vice wing commander, the colonel. He's like the number 2 guy or the number 1 guy at the forward base that the U.S. forces are located at in Jordan. It's called Mawafik Salti, and it's unusual, but it's not out of the ordinary. Completely impossible that a guy like that, a colonel, say, "Hey, I want to fly. I want to go out and get some blood on my shoes." So they were conducting a bombing run, and this was in preparation for this other operation that was going to go down. They get shot down. Immediately after getting shot down, then they put out the story that the plane actually crashed like 120 miles to the southwest, and that the pilot was being picked up 120 miles to the southwest. CIA and the Department of War went into overdrive, trying to, like a magician, distract you. Hey, look over here at the shiny object. Then they scrambled to put together a rescue mission. So it was a legitimate rescue mission. And the stories that have come out about how this pilot hiked anywhere from 5 miles to 10 miles doing escape and evasion, and then hid himself up in this mountain crevice, and the CIA located him because of his heartbeat. They really put that out there. They said, we got this super secret technology. We can detect heartbeats from outer space. Right. So you're telling me that you'd taken an EKG of this guy at some point, stored it in your files, and then just because you knew at some point he'd get shot down, you could go find his heartbeat? Please. They put that story out to cover up the real story of how they knew they were able to find him, to protect another source and method. It turns out the guy actually, he landed in his parachute about 3 miles from where the plane crashed. This was all south of Isfahan. And when he landed, it looks like he broke his ankle. So he has a broken ankle. So he's not marching 5 miles anywhere. He hobbled about 1.5 miles up this mountain slope, hid in a crevice, and that's where he was. They then repurposed. So these C-130Js, that's the JSOC bird that the special ops guys fly on. They had already been packed with these 2 little birds on each plane, and they repurposed it and said, okay, this is going to be, you're going to go do the rescue, because they couldn't get a Black Hawk in there, and they put them in as backup. Said if one goes down, we're going to have a backup, and that means you can have about 15. You had 2 PJs on each bird. They didn't take a full complement of pilots for each one of the 4. They had a pilot for one of the little birds on one, and a pilot for little birds on the other. But they did get into a firefight of some sort, and they had to call. And when those planes went in and landed, they didn't do a site survey. They dug into the ground. Propellers got bent, but they pulled off the rescue. So it was a rescue, but it actually, I think, derailed this other raid that was going to take place. So you didn't have the full number of people. What's interesting is, when I first heard it, they were showing a picture of a airstrip that is in that vicinity, and it's clear they didn't use the airstrip. And that is either because it was under surveillance or there were hostile forces up there. But they crash landed they landed in the desert, and the plane dug in. So, you got to sort through, as Trump and Hegseth and Ratcliffe are telling the story, it sounded like the arrival of the Barnum and Bailey circus in town.
Larry, we have seen a lot here in the last 60 to 90 days here of what the renamed Department of War is capable of. The verbiage coming out of the commander-in-chief, where it's outright war crimes in print.
Correct.
Disturbing to see some of the tweets in the last couple of weeks here. But there's another thing that really concerns me, and to what extent is the U.S. government lying to us? To what extent has the U.S. government lied to us? And how far do we go back to see what is really lies? When I used to watch some of these programs on television many years ago, well, programs even called conspiracy theory, some people used to get a chuckle out of them and say, yeah, wow, it's amazing what people used to believe. Well, I'm starting to question stuff now. And I'm starting to go back in my calendar and saying, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. This time in history doesn't make sense. The world was told this, but something else happened. And I mean, you're a guy, you had access to quite a bit of information at the time. You've got friends probably that were either in the business. You've probably chatted amongst yourself. How corrupt is these administrations? What are they covering up? And why Iran? And why so aggressive?
Yeah, my theory on that is Iran represents one of it may be the only one. Yeah, I think it's the only country where we conducted a color revolution, a CIA coup, installed a government that was pliant, to do what they were our puppet. And then through a genuine popular revolution, they were overthrown, and the U.S. lost control of that country. And that country, in the broader scheme of things, Iran is seen as a critical location with respect to Russia and China, and both in terms economically and because of it's part of an ancient trade route, north-south and east-west. The lies, the propaganda we've been fed in the United States about Iran ever since then is just it's completely. It's a complete fabrication. For example, we're told that Iran's been attacking us for 46 years, 47 years. Now, I just arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1979 to start work on a PhD. And I remember very clearly that when the embassy was taken over, the outrage that was fueled. That's where Ted Koppel, got his birth. He started up Nightline, and like 20 years later, I was appearing on Nightline as a commentator. I did probably 18 shows with them. But we ignore the fact that in September of 1980, while there were Americans being held hostage at the embassy in Tehran, Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski thought it was a good idea to encourage a guy named Saddam Hussein to attack Iran, to start a war. They thought that would be a way to help pressure the Iranian government, this new Islamic Republic, to maybe give up the hostages. Well, that didn't work. Ronald Reagan comes in and ends up dispatching a guy named Donald Rumsfeld over to Iraq to do what? Well, he was providing precursor chemicals that were then being used by Iraq to make chemical weapons that we were then encouraging the Iraqis to use against the Iranians. So these weapons of mass destruction that we later invaded Iraq over, we were the ones providing the chemical weapons to Iraq. Iraq carried out over 20 such attacks between August of 83 and August of 88. And then on top of it, we were providing intelligence. You know how excited we get today that, by God, those Russians are providing the Iranians intelligence. This is an outrage. Hell, we were doing that, and how do I know? The guy who hand carried it, Walter Patrick Lang, he left the Army as a colonel. He set up the Arabic program at West Point. He was defense attaché to Saudi Arabia and Yemen. He was the guy carrying the intelligence. So that's how I know that. So we step back and realize the United States was using Iraq as a proxy to attack Iran, killing 300,000 Iranians at least, of which 70,000 are civilians. And then we ask the stupid question, why do they chant death to America? What have we done to them? Plenty. And, I go on with the history of this, of how the United States has been involved with sponsoring terrorist groups, encouraging and carrying out terrorist attacks inside Iran. And yet we paint Iran as the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world, when it's just factually, in terms of the numbers, not true. So this flood of lies about Iran, it's still hitting us today. In fact, it's worse today than it was maybe 45 years ago.
Larry, do you think they're coming for China next?
Oh yeah, that's the ultimate. Prize. All of this, taking out Iran, getting control of Iran, and getting control of the Caucasus from Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. That is to go to the soft underbelly of Russia, because we want to break up Russia. Russia can't be allowed to be that big, but we need Russia in order to go after China. And the number of people who they're educated, they score well on the IQ tests, but they keep saying the most ridiculous stuff about, oh yeah, there's no way that Russia can get along with China. This is not a real relationship. And I mean, it's like, do you guys even read history? You go back to World War II, the then Soviet Union provided significant military assistance to the Chinese, both the Kuomintang, the conservatives, and the commies. They helped them both. So this notion that China and Russia are these implacable, eternal enemies that can't really get along. No, They're more like Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. They are the odd couple, but they get along.
When we talk about America's strategy to come for China, is that to
Wait. What was that word you
economically?
used? What was that word you used? You got with an S? Is that strategy?
Yeah.
Okay, go
Okay.
ahead. Sorry.
Well, forgive me for being so propagandized by the Western media that I lose my sense of thought sometimes. But no, joking aside, if we really, I'm sitting here in China right now. This is a country that it's an economic powerhouse. It
Yes.
invests in its people. It invested in its infrastructure, and it continues to improve as a country, and has not been in a conflict since 1979.
Correct.
And if you go back in the history, a lot of people will bring up sensitive time in Chinese history, but when you look and you study it, it's not what it really is. You spoke about the Soviets in World War II. We have to ask ourselves, well, why isn't there a Hollywood movie commending the multi-millions of Soviets that died in World War II? Why don't we see movies of those heroes that came to support, the fight against the Germans? We don't see that. We don't see these. And why is that? I believe the number is anywhere from 24 to 28 million people died in that war. And we say that the Russians are our enemies, our adversaries. And now fast forward to 2026, one of the largest trading partners besides Canada, which the Americans have threatened to be the 51st state. I chuckled at a while ago. Now I kind of almost take it serious that they might do it. They might be dumb enough to do it. But here we are in China. The country is going amongst its way. It's trying to stay out of this. It's winning by not saying anything. But now we hear the drums are beating. Lindsey Graham's getting ready. He's pumped up, ready to go. The mainstream media channels, they're bringing out all the puppets and saying, China, 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 China bad, China next.
Yeah.
To me, I'm getting a bit concerned here. What kind of tactics, not strategy, but what kind of antics would these Americans get up to here to try to pull something like that, what they've done in Iran, to here?
Well, America is in a state of both self-denial and delusion. It's the double Ds. Along with what the Soviet Union experienced in World War II, China had either the second largest loss of civilians and military personnel next to Russia, or it had more. There's some dispute about the actual numbers, but put it together, let's say it was close to between 57 and 60 million people total between Russia and China died. That's like 80% of the people that died in World War II was concentrated in those countries. And the vast majority of Americans don't realize that China kept 70% of the Japanese army pinned down in China. So, we got John Wayne with the Sands of Iwo Jima and, Guadalcanal and all of them, Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. We won that war. We only fought 30% of the Japanese army because the Chinese were fighting the other 70%. So, but, we get the right to history. So it's a mental illness with respect to China. We get upset that the Chinese are going out and they're buying up all of these supply chains. Yeah, because they recognize how the system works, and so when they do what is a rational, logical business practice, we get outraged at it. Right now, the United States we are crippled, and we don't realize it. We keep talking these weapon systems that we're going to use in these military engagements, and yet all the supply chain comes out of China. The rare earth minerals, in particular, we don't have the processing. The actual raw materials for rare earth minerals, they exist here in the United States. We just haven't put together the processing plants to extract them so that we would have it on our own. So this is the constant negative portrayal of China as our arch enemy. And yet, as I look back, so I was just graduating high school in '72 when Nixon made his famous trip. And when you look at what China has accomplished in the course of now 54 years, it's unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. We don't have anything in the history of the world which matches the rise of China from this largely agricultural society with, a significant level of illiteracy to one of the most literate societies now in the world, and with modern technologies that frankly put the United States to shame. So this effort, it's now almost like jealousy on the part of the United States. We can't allow somebody else to succeed, and it's our, part of it's our mentality. The United States has a particularly corrupt outlook, and it's illustrated. I've told the joke about the two Hollywood agents sitting at a table, watch this beautiful starlet walk by. They look at her, and one says to the other, "I'd like to screw her," and the other one says, "Out of what?" And so it's always an exploitative view. Whereas you find within both the Chinese and the Russian cultures, it's very much more collaborative. They're not sitting there looking at somebody, man, how can I pull a scam and cheat them? What can we do together that's going to build us up? And I think that is a real difference that most Americans, I don't think we take time to reflect and realize we have that kind of attitude.
Larry, my last question for you, two-part question. Is this war over in Iran? If it is, okay. Where's America going next?
Yeah. No, the war is not over. The ceasefire, I don't think will hold at all. Not because Iran's willing to abide by this, the United States and Israel that won't. And Israel's going to be the one, frankly, that's going to be desperate to try to get the war restarted. But the irony there is if they restart it, they're going to be in more trouble than if they just went along with a ceasefire. Iran has changed the face of the global economy now. And I think it's an irreversible change. By controlling, it's like you had this nightclub that everybody could come in and out. There was no control at the door. Now they got a doorman, and you got to pay a cover charge to get in, and you got to pay a cover charge to leave. And if you don't want to pay the cover charge, we'll break your knees. It's that kind of thing. But by seizing control of it and determining who gets to come in and go out, they are they've got to find a good. They put $96 billion a year in their pocket, easy. So these past economic sanctions, they're out the door, and their partner in this is China. And see, China's played sort of the hidden hand role in all of this. People think Pakistan is the leading effort pushing for the ceasefire. And we need to understand, Iran didn't go to Pakistan. Iran was content to continue just putting missile after missile into Israel and into all the U.S. military bases in the Gulf states. It was China that went to Iran and said, "Hey, come on, let's finally," because the Americans have been pleading for this for 3 weeks. And then, you watch today this spectacle of Pete Hegseth and Dan Kane, the general, about, "Oh yeah, man, we beat up Iran so bad they came begging. They were begging for this ceasefire. They couldn't wait." No, that's a complete lie. But Americans believe it. And what I find crazy, and I'd rely upon your insights on this, what the hell is going on with the Wall Street people that believe this bullshit? I mean, they're supposed to be savvy and shrewd. I learned. We did work. My partner and I. We did some investigative work for Bill Ackman on his short on Herbalife.
Oh yeah,
and we're shocked to discover that this billionaire, who you think is this maven of Wall Street, they hadn't done the basic research. They didn't realize that Herbalife was a colluded stock. Okay, They're shorting a colluded stock. Guess what? And it doesn't work. And you'd think they would have thought that through in advance. Oh no. So that gave me insight that all these powerhouses on Wall Street, they're sometimes flying by the seat of their pants, and they don't really think things through. So yeah, this war's not over by a long stretch, but what is clear, Iran's in a much stronger position now than it ever has been. It's coming out. It's going to actually, I think, experience some significant economic growth going forward.
Well, I hope they rebuild soon when the bombs stop raining down on it. Larry, where can everybody find your work?
I'm at sonar21.com.
Okay. I just want to thank you once again and look forward to having you on more often if you have time. I know you're a busy guy.
Oh, yeah. No, always.
What's going on?
I always make time for you because you've got some incredible analysis on what's going on. You know, that derivative bomb, man, when that goes off, holy smokes.
Yeah, I agree with you, Larry. You know, it's an economic time bomb here with the derivatives market. It's a 700 trillion to a 1 quadrillion market. Big bets in the world, 10 times the size of the world economy. These are the guys that call the shots, and they do it blind. They fly stealth before the market's open and after the market has closed. That's when the big boys, the big money, and the regulators have gone to sleep behind the wheel. And this is where they just rip off the average person. And that is amazing. You know, what they are doing to the average hardworking American, just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and when it blows up, people go, well, why didn't we know this? Yeah. Well, because you didn't listen to Alex at Reporterfy.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So, Larry, thank you again for everything. I'm going to keep you backstage just for a couple of minutes while we update the high resolution so everybody can enjoy it. Again, everybody, I'll put Larry's information in the description below. You'll see him either with me again on this show with my partner, Cyrus Jansen, on the Let's Talk Geopolitics program, which is weekly now and will soon be going 2 times a week. Larry, great talking with you. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.